Hello, this is Arun from Zoho, and I'm delighted to be here with Dennis Pombriant, the managing partner of Beagle Research. I'd love to hear about your background, what you guys do at Beagle Research, and what you're working on today.
Well, I've been in the independent analyst community for about 20 years. In fact, exactly 20 years. So what I do changes all the time. I've always been involved in front office software. When I started in the industry, cloud computing was not really anything yet, and everything was client server. And I was the first analyst to start a practice focusing on cloud computing, or what became cloud computing. And over the years, I've always paid attention to core CRM and especially what was being added to it over time. So over time, we've seen waves of additions like social media, for example, or analytics, or just the movement from client server to the cloud, things like that.
And here we are in 2020. What do you see as sort of the cutting? What's on the cutting edge of CRM, and what are companies implementing that is really taking CRM to the next level?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's not so much, marketing is this year, or service and support. What's really driving the whole industry is based on the idea of the digital disruption. You can't have a digital disruption unless you've got really good software to drive it. And in my research and in my writing and in my books, I talk about the need to have flexible software based on a platform that drives business agility, because ultimately it's the business's agility, its ability to pivot, to get into new business models, to get into new customers quickly with the right products and services that makes the difference between success and failure today. So it's platform. It's not sales. It's not marketing. I mean, they're important. We've done those. Platform is it these days.
One of the papers you recently published is called Solving the Rubik's Cube of ROI. And I thought it was very fascinating because you spoke about front-end software as a platform. Can you describe the metaphor that you use of the Rubik's Cube and how it relates to ROI?
Sure, it's actually quite important because if you've ever tried solving a Rubik's Cube, you know that you can't arrange all of the blue tiles on one side and forget about the other five sides, because it won't solve the cube. You have to solve five sides at once. And in ROI, what I've noticed over the years is that we've gone from a situation where people would buy technology to solve a problem, and they'd calculate our ROI based on the cost of the goods that they bought, hardware, software, implementation services, whatever, and whatever costs that they could displace, whether it was labor or, gee, we don't need to print as much, or whatever. And it was a quick, simple bit of math to say, okay, we got an ROI of X, and that's good, and the boss is happy. Well, today you can't really do that. I mean, you certainly can to get started, but the way the digital disruption is operating, every transaction, every customer interaction has to be an opportunity to generate ROI. I'm not saying everyone does, but everyone has to be an opportunity, and that's the other five sides of the cube. So whether you're talking about suggesting the right product for a customer, or suggesting the right line of service and support, what you're doing is you're taking existing data, turning it into information, and enabling your business to act intelligently in the moment with your customers. All that is based on platform, and that's where ROI comes from today.
And speaking of data, as you're saying, one differentiation you mentioned in the paper is about systems of record versus systems of engagement. And can you talk about what are the differences between those two, and why is it important for a company to recognize those differences?
Well, I think every company already has systems of record, and every company that has systems of record is probably feeling that they're not competing effectively in the marketplace. And that's because systems of records gather data and regurgitate data, and they're designed to give human beings the data that they can turn into information between their ears with their electrochemical computers. But today, what you need to be aware of is that information is driving interactions even when there are no people involved. So your employees might not be involved. Your systems might be working with your customers. So systems of record only go so far. You need to turn the data into information, and then that information has to be used to service customers, whether it's through your employees or directly to your customers, in ways that further engage the customer. That's another big watchword today: customer engagement. How do we make sure that the customer likes us so much that they want to keep coming back? Because that's how things like customer lifetime value, for example, get maximized when customers keep coming back. So you have to have systems that I won't say think, because they don't, but they use analytics, they use machine learning to make sure that they're delivering the best, most optimum information or offer or service to a customer.
And so, speaking of engagement, how are some of these front end systems and CRMs and tools and platforms, how have they evolved over the years to where they are today to deliver exemplary engagement? And, what are sort of some of the means that they use to improve customer engagement right now?
Well, believe it or not, we've been trying to do this for a long, long time. We haven't talked about customer experience very much. I mean, customer experience is something that's been talked about for a good 10 years. And unfortunately, when we talk about experience, it's usually I, the vendor, know what the customer wants, so I'll build something that they can use, and it'll all be great. But I build it hard-coded, and maybe it's not very changeable, and maybe it doesn't really serve the customer need, or worse, it serves the customer need today, but a year from now it's out of date and it doesn't work. So fast forward to engagement. Engagement is all about being at the right place at the right time with the right information for the customer. A lot of it has to do with turnaround time. A minute ago, I talked about hard coding. When you hard code something, it's very hard to make an edit, a change that doesn't clobber something that you hadn't even thought about in another part of the business process. What's great about platform in this instance is that you work at a level above the code. You work at a metadata level. You describe to the system what it needs to do to help customers. And then the system goes off and it generates code. And it's not just that it generates generates code that weaves together analytics and workflow and voice and all the sales and marketing stuff. But all of that together is what makes today's system so powerful, and it gives any organization that's using that a big leg up on organizations that are still using systems of record.
How is artificial intelligence improving the customer experience and, as a result, also delivering ROI to the business that's implementing that?
Well, maybe it's just me personally, but I have a hard time talking about artificial intelligence because I think machines are still pretty dumb. But the machines are really good if you give them a big enough sample at understanding a particular thing that they have to do. You show a machine a million pictures of a duck, and it can identify a duck. If you take that to a business situation, through machine learning, a system can get pretty smart about what needs to be done in this kind of situation, this kind of instance. And when I think about the progress we've made, it's in having machine learning and really good tunable algorithms that enable us to be in the moment with the customer. Because let's face it, we can't afford to employ all the people that are needed to support customers in every instance. I mean, some things, and frankly, customers don't want to be supported that much. Sure. They like to get on and get off. And if they're dealing with a machine, sometimes that's a benefit.
So, Dennis, can you talk about some of the qualities one would look for in a platform as they look for something to deliver improved customer engagement?
Okay, well, what I always tell my customers who are shopping is that you have to configure a solution or buy a solution for your needs, and that's harder than you think. For the simple reason that most people, and I've done surveys on this. I've done research. I've researched 1,000 big companies, and I've asked them the simple question: when you went out to buy your CRM system, did you do an in-house needs analysis first? And only half of them did, which was just blew my mind, because at the end, when reporters came around and said, "So how is it? How do you like it?" The ones that it turns out that didn't do a pre-implementation checklist were not happy with what they'd gotten, because they kind of thought that their business problem was here and they got to here. But in point of fact, the people that we researched that did the work, their problem was down here and they got up to here and they were ecstatic, and they had the ability to make the comparison. So first things first, do an analysis. After that, there are things that you're not going to be able to predict how you're going to use the system in 5 years, and you want the system to be operating for you in 5 years. You want your investment to be secure. So the best thing I think that you can do is to get a product that has a solid, proven platform that generates code for most contingencies, and that's easy to use, and that lets you get into hard coding if you need to, customize an algorithm or something. But more often than not, you should be working at a clicks level, not at a code level, because your developer productivity is going to be so much higher, and you're going to be able to turn customer requests around. And if we go back to some of the other things we've been talking about, the Agile Business is supported by flexible software. Flexible software needs to be something that can be turned over quickly, which is platform oriented.
And one of the things you said about one of the things you just mentioned is agile business, flexible software, and in a lot of your papers, you frequently mention or allude to the importance of having agility with your software and being an agile company. Can you talk about what are some qualities one would look for in identifying a platform or software that is agile?
What I would say is, and there've been papers in like Harvard Business Review about this. Nobody's got any sustainable differentiation anymore. You can be a big company and you're getting challenged by startups for the simple reason that the startups can afford and have all of the same kinds of access to the internet, access to finance, access to world-beating application software. So your differentiator is in how fast you can pivot, how well you can turn on a dime, which means in some cases spinning up a whole new business model. I mean, maybe you're a traditional product company and you decide to dip your toe in the subscription waters, selling your product as a service. That's a different business model. It's a different billing situation. It's different receivables. It's different metrics too. So my advice to anybody getting into the market is to try to identify platforms, solutions that aren't going to obsolete, that are going to grow as you grow, that are going to give you more potential than you know you need.
So when a company is implementing new software or potentially replacing a software, how important is how important is the interplay between your front end software and your back end software when it comes to successful deployment?
Well, it's huge, right? I mean, because the front end and the back end are basically going after the same data, maybe different calculations on the data. So it's absolutely essential that whatever you're bringing in harmonizes, works well. I don't care if it's you're bringing in front office or back office. What you're bringing in has to be able to work with what's there. And my strong recommendation to a lot of companies is to use something I call the surround strategy, to use the integration capabilities built into a software platform to not simply integrate the new system with, say, the new front end with the old back end, but to integrate the new front end with some aspects of the old front end and the old back end. For the simple reason that if you do that, you don't have to have a big rip and replace. Monday morning, it's all different. That's terrible. That's terrible. And there are a lot of people with senior titles today who grew up in the 1990s in our industry who had to live through the great Y2K changeover, and most of them don't want to do that again. So having the ability to integrate everything, let the system generate the interfaces, and then move your workloads in a logical way does wonderful things for keeping the business up and running and limiting the wear and tear on your employees, and probably some other things too.
And you mentioned the rip and replace, and I think for a lot of businesses, the big fear of ever implementing new software or potentially replacing software is the pain of the changeover. So keeping that in mind, is it important when somebody is looking for, or a business is looking for, a new software, either to replace something existing or to add on to what they're doing? Is it important to look for a new software that is sort of modular, that you're able to implement in sort of small doses in different aspects of your company?
I think so. I think absolutely so, provided that the modularity is tied closely to integration capability, and the same ability to generate code that works the back and forth between the apps, the new apps and the old apps, or the modules themselves. Having a set of modules that are all built on the same code set, really good idea. Having the ability to integrate those with whatever you have hanging around from 10 years ago, that's a great thing. So those are the two biggies, I think.
Well, Dennis, I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you again for joining us. Again, this is Arun from Zoho here with Dennis Pombriant, the managing partner of Beagle Research.